stay till the end of the video where I'm going to show a handful of sample shots from this camera. That camera is the Canon EOS 3. This was introduced in November of 1998 and I think started shipping in early 1999. It replaced the EOS A2, A2E, and EOS 5 in terms of the professional or advanced amateur camera that was just below the 1N or eventually the 1V. But it combined a lot of requested features from users of those cameras as well as users of the EOS 1N, since it straddled the time frame of releases between the 1N and 1V. Some of the features that were included in this camera found their way to the 1V when that was eventually released later. The Canon EOS 3 can be found on the used market for about $250 to $350. That's the price range that seems reasonable. That's the common price range that you find on eBay. But if you find it cheaper than $250 and it's working, that's a great deal. I would say pick it up for nothing else other than if you want to resell it and make some money, you probably could. Every once in a while you'll see a $500, $600 listing. Sometimes those have the box included and those are in pristine condition. But the average price that I've found is $250 to $350. If you've watched my other videos before, you've noticed that all of a sudden there's a huge price jump in with this camera compared to other EOS cameras I've reviewed. One of the benefits of almost every camera I've reviewed so far is that they're extremely cheap and affordable, but yet give you a lot of camera for the money. Compared to those, this isn't cheap, but if you consider that you're getting a professional film camera, meaning that there is pretty much no features in any film competitor camera that this didn't have. So you're getting top of the line for a couple $100, and you know top of the line digital camera would be in the thousands of dollars. So compared to other EOS film cameras, this is one of the most expensive ones, but I do think it's worth it, and it's a camera that you could have forever. Okay, so now on to the pros and cons list. For me, most of these EOS cameras have a lot more good than bad, and most of that comes from the fact that we are 20 to 30 years past their prime, and they give you a lot of camera value for a low price. This doesn't have quite that advantage because it is a little more expensive, but the pros list still outweigh the cons list by far. And my cons list on this camera, the negatives on this camera, are again just like the A2E, are things I kind of had to reach for and be really nitpicky with. But once you get to this range of camera choices, the only way to tell the difference between them is to really nitpick and compare those fine details. So that's what we'll do. So right off the bat, the price might be a negative for you, and that's a valid point. It may be too expensive for you. Beyond that, it's a little harder to find than an A2 or an Elon camera. Those are negatives in terms of you searching out cameras. As far as the actual use of it and the aspects of it, one negative is that this camera doesn't have a dioptric adjustment on the viewfinder. So if you have glasses or you need to adjust the way you look at the viewfinder so you can make sure you're getting focus, this doesn't have that built in. So if you want that right off the bat, then the EOS 1N might be a better choice. Another common negative that I see a lot that is not a big deal to me, but I have to point it out because I think it could be a valid concern for some people, is the noise. When you take a shot, it's definitely not quiet. I'll let you hear it for yourself. So if you compare that to the EOS 1N, which is also not quiet, but not nearly as loud, that is noticeably louder. And I don't have a lens on this one, but you'll hear the difference. The EOS A2E is actually, I think, the quietest out of those three. But if you're doing street photography or photography inside and you want to be a little more discreet about taking photos, that's going to be pretty obvious when you take a shot. So if you want something that's silent, there are other cameras to look at. And obviously, if you want something that's silent, maybe digital mirrorless might be the best way to go there. But if a loud shutter is a problem for you, this camera is not the one. For me, it's not a big deal. Okay, that's pretty much it for the cons list that I could think of. If I if I think of any more, I'll put it in the comments later. But let's move on to the pros list. Okay, so the positives about this camera, I'll list them, but you can pretty much go back to almost every EOS film camera and apply those same positives to this one, but this one's going to have a few more. So right off the bat, one of my favorite things about these cameras is the familiar design, and this one exceeds in that area. This one feels like I'm using one of their digital DSLRs. So like its EOS brothers, it has the command dial on the back. It turns on and off in a similar way, but it also has little design details that I find are helpful, like the way these buttons on the back are slightly raised and protruding, so they're very easy to feel when you put your thumb up there to do back button autofocus or to change the focus point. So the design is one of the best in the EOS camera lineup, in my opinion. It's also one of the better built ones, and this is no surprise since this is one of the top of the line cameras that they would sell. But it has really good build quality. You can feel it throughout. It might come across as maybe slightly cheaper or less less quality than the EOS 1 or 1V, but when you hold it in your hand and you use it, you don't feel it. You feel like you're holding a high quality DSLR. So the build quality is where you'd expect it to be, and it's at the top of the EOS film camera lineup for sure. Another thing in terms of design and function is the depth of field preview button. So not only does it have one, which I like cameras that do, but it has the location of the depth of field preview button in the exact same spot as the other pro cameras and DSLRs. So on the EOS 1N, it's in the same spot. The EOS 1N button is slightly larger, but it's in the same spot. The button on my Canon 6D is in the exact same spot. So having those commonalities between cameras make it easy to pick one up at any time and have that muscle memory knowing where everything is at. So the depth of field preview button being in the exact same spot is pretty cool. Another thing that I always consider when I'm picking a film camera to use on a daily basis is the viewfinder. And the first thing I notice about this one is that it is a large and clear viewfinder. Also in the viewfinder, you have the information that you want. You have your shutter speed, aperture. You have a very nice exposure scale on the right. So not only is the view clear, but it has all the data that you want in a camera like this. It also has a interchangeable focusing screens, so you can put focusing screens on here from the ones that are compatible with the 1N and 1V, and I don't even know how many they sell, but there's a lot of options out there to find the focusing screen that fits what you're looking for. So a very large viewfinder that makes it easy to see is something that I like, and this camera delivers. And no surprise here, but this one also allows you to do autofocus on the back button, which is one of the customizable features of these cameras. And again, just like the A2E, you can customize features on this camera, including that one. You can customize that. You can customize the way the spot metering works with your autofocus points. There's a whole bunch of other things, but the back button autofocus is something that I use, and that's something I turn on instantly when I get a new EOS camera if it has it on there. Okay, so another positive on here that some of the other cameras have is the eye control autofocus. The eye control autofocus wasn't on every EOS camera, but it was on a handful, and it's a feature that I've talked about before. It's also a feature that I haven't quite used enough to become reliant on it. This camera, which is another positive, is this camera has 45 autofocus points. So when you consider the fact that only a handful of the DSLR cameras from Canon have that many, it's pretty impressive that this one did. In a camera in the late 90s had that many autofocus points. Yes, they are kind of clumped in the center, but that's just the way autofocus points were back in the day. They didn't completely cover the frame. That being said, I almost always use center autofocus point because of the stuff I shoot. But if you want some flexibility in the amount of autofocus points, this delivers with 45. So the eye control autofocus on here works slightly differently because of the multiple autofocus points that it has. I think your eye is selecting a zone and it's selecting an autofocus point in that area to work with. So I'm still getting used to using it on this camera, but if the eye control autofocus is a feature that you like or want to use, this camera has that too. And when you compare this camera to the 1N or 1V, this is the only one of those three that has the eye control autofocus. So that eye control was something on the Elon series and the A2E, and this carried that into this model. Another small positive that I like on this one on the 1N is that the top screen is illuminated. Obviously you can see your settings in the viewfinder, but sometimes it's nice if you have it on a tripod and if it's at night and you want to just look down at the camera to see what your settings are. You can hit the illumination button and see it really, really easily. So that's pretty cool. So the metering options on this camera are everything you'd want. It has a 21 zone evaluative metering. It has center weighted partial metering at 8.5%, and it has spot metering at 2.4%. The cool thing about the spot metering is that you can spot meter at 2.4% at the center point, which most cameras that spot meter do it at the center point, but you can actually follow the autofocus point that you select with that same measurement of spot metering. So that's pretty cool. Another cool thing about the metering options on this camera, which is one of my favorite features in terms of the metering capabilities, is that you can do a multi-spot metering. So you can take a reading at one area and push a button to mark it, take a reading at another area and mark it there. So that's really handy if you need to meter for your highlights, see where your midtones are at, and then look at your shadows. And you can get the best of both worlds, where evaluative metering would do that for you. But if you like doing spot metering, you can kind of get that overall view of your image exposure using multi-spot metering. Like I said, I've only had this camera a few months, but I've used enough of the EOS cameras and to know what I'm looking for. And I knew by looking at this camera online that it checked a lot of the boxes for me. To be honest, the reason I never had it before this, because I had a 1N and I had an A2, so there was nothing I was lacking. So paying $250 to $300 for this camera wasn't something I was going to rush to do, but I found a really, really good deal on this one, and I couldn't pass it up, especially in the shape that it's in and knowing that it'll be a camera I'm going to keep forever. My shooting experience with this camera has been great, and there's really, in my mind, there's no negatives about it. They clearly took all the stuff they've learned at that time, their 13 years of making EOS film cameras, and put it into this one. And I'm assuming they did the same thing to the 1V. I haven't never tried the 1V yet. Hopefully that will be able to get that and review that soon. But having this camera in my bag feels like I have my 6D in my bag. It feels completely interchangeable, not only with lenses but with features, button layout, the viewfinder. It feels very, very, very similar, which is a good thing, because that means I don't skip a beat when I'm pulling out my film camera, pulling out my DSLR. I can just shoot and not have to worry about any obstacles. Once you get to this level of the EOS film camera lineup, like I said, it's comparing the minute details to decide if you're looking at those three, or even if you throw the A2 in the mix, you're just coming down to what's going to fit your preferences, whether it's the weight, the design, the feel, the autofocus points. there's only going to be a few things that will really make or break those decisions. And if you get to these three and there's nothing that you like, or you're seeing features that are not what you're looking for, that might be the point where you look at Nikon and you compare these to the f4, f5, f6, and even the f100. That group of cameras would be what I would compare to these. And other than the f4 is kind of an anomaly in a regard where it's an autofocus camera, but it has a lot of the features from the old school manual focus cameras that was around prior to that. Obviously, Nikon versus Canon debate today is something I don't even care to do now. Camera brands are pretty much just a preference. Everyone has their own. I really don't think one is completely better than the other. It's what you use it for, what you're used to, what gear you already have. I've just chose to really concentrate on the EOS film camera lineup because that's what I learned on. It's the DSLR I have, and it's just what I'm used to. I've shot Nikon stuff a ton, and I even bought a Nikon DSLR a few years ago, but I just found that the net positives of me learning a new camera layout and features and whatnot wasn't worth completely ditching my Canon gear at the time. So my point being is that if you're starting from zero, I think the EOS film lineup is a great collection of cameras to choose from. I have a sentimental attachment to the EOS 1N, but that being said, the EOS 3 is quickly becoming my favorite film camera I've ever owned, because it checks all the features list that I want to have. It feels really good to shoot with. There's no obstacles there. All the dials and buttons and menus and everything's really responsive. And obviously it takes the lenses that I own. So if you see an EOS 3 camera out there and it fits your budget, you're not going to regret it. It's going to be an amazing camera that you can have forever and shoot some awesome stuff. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you're enjoying these. Please subscribe. I really enjoy the fact that I'm getting more and more views on this, but I would like more subscribers so you can help lift those videos up to push out to more people. So like and subscribe and comment if you have any feedback, or let me know what you're shooting with.